"Don't leave yet, ma'am." Those were the words that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. I was already halfway down the front walkway when Walter Reed, the gardener who had worked on our property for nearly 15 years, hurried toward me and gently caught my wrist. The evening air was cool for early September, and the last traces of sunlight were fading behind the tall maple trees that lined the driveway. Walter was not a man who interfered in family matters. He trimmed hedges, planted flowers, and quietly disappeared into the background of our lives. That was why the look in his eyes unsettled me. It wasn't panic. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. "Please," he said quietly, "don't go yet." I stared at him, confused. Behind us, the lights of the house glowed warmly through the windows. From the outside, everything looked perfect. My son Ryan and his wife Brooke had spent the entire evening celebrating what they called a fresh start for the family. The dinner had been pleasant enough. Brooke had smiled often. Ryan had poured my tea and asked if I needed anything. They had both insisted that I spend more time with them lately, claiming they wanted us to grow closer after the difficult year we'd all endured since my husband passed away. Looking back, that should have been my first warning. People rarely change overnight. "Walter," I said carefully, "what are you talking about?" He glanced toward the house before lowering his voice. "I can't explain right now. Just trust me. Don't leave." For a moment, I considered brushing off his concern. I was 72 years old. I had spent decades raising a family, managing a household, and making difficult decisions. The idea of hiding behind a gardener's vague warning felt ridiculous. Yet something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Walter's hands trembled slightly. Maybe it was the memory of my late husband James telling me years ago that Walter was one of the few people he trusted completely. Or maybe it was simply the strange feeling that had lingered throughout the evening, a feeling I couldn't quite name. I turned and looked back at the house. Through the dining room window, I could see Brooke clearing plates from the table. Ryan stood beside her, speaking quietly. Their expressions were serious now, different from the cheerful faces they had shown me only minutes earlier. "If I stay," I asked, "what exactly am I supposed to do?" Walter hesitated. "Watch," he said. "Just watch." 20 minutes later, instead of driving home, I found myself hidden inside the old greenhouse near the back of the property. The structure sat behind a row of evergreens and had not been used regularly in years. Dust covered the wooden shelves, and the scent of soil lingered in the air. From a narrow opening between the plants, I had a clear view of the rear entrance to the house. I felt foolish sitting there. Absolutely foolish. Yet I stayed. The minutes passed slowly. The family gathering ended. The guests left. The lights inside the house dimmed one by one. By 10:30, the property appeared completely quiet. Then something unexpected happened. Ryan and Brooke did not leave for the evening as they had announced during dinner. Instead, they remained inside. Room after room lit up again. Shadows moved across the windows. At one point, Brooke stepped outside and checked the driveway as if she were waiting for someone. My heartbeat quickened. Walter's warning echoed in my mind. Something is happening tonight. 11 o'clock came and went. The night grew still. Then, at exactly 11:17, headlights appeared beyond the front gate. A long black van rolled silently up the driveway and stopped beside the house. Every light inside the first floor suddenly came on. Brooke hurried outside before the vehicle had even fully stopped. Ryan followed close behind. I watched 3 men step out of the van. They exchanged brief greetings before opening the rear doors. One by one, large storage boxes were carried into the house. I leaned forward, straining to see through the darkness. Then a passing beam of light illuminated one of the labels attached to a box. My breath caught in my throat. Printed clearly across the white sticker were 2 words I recognized instantly. James Carter. I remained frozen behind the dusty shelves of the greenhouse, staring toward the illuminated windows of the house. James Carter. My husband's name. Seeing those 2 words on a storage box at nearly midnight felt unreal. James had been gone for almost 2 years. His clothes had been donated. His office had been cleaned. His personal papers had supposedly been organized and archived by Ryan and Brooke shortly after the funeral. At least that was what they had told me. Yet here, under the cover of darkness, strangers were carrying boxes marked with his name into the house. The night air suddenly felt colder. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and watched. The men worked quickly but calmly. There was no sense of urgency. No sign that anything illegal or dangerous was happening. In fact, Everything appeared strangely organized. That detail bothered me more than anything else. People only plan carefully when they know exactly what they are doing. Brooke stood near the back entrance holding a clipboard. Every time a box disappeared inside, she checked something off on a sheet of paper. Ryan remained beside her, speaking occasionally with one of the men. I could not hear their conversation from where I was hidden, but I noticed something unsettling. My son looked nervous. He kept glancing toward the dark corners of the property as though he was afraid someone might be watching. If he had looked a little farther toward the greenhouse, he would have discovered that someone was. I thought about leaving. I thought about walking directly to the house and demanding answers. But something held me back. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was caution. For years after James died, I had ignored small inconsistencies because I wanted to believe my family was still intact. Every uncomfortable feeling had been explained away. Every strange decision had been given a reasonable excuse. Tonight felt different. Tonight, I wanted facts before emotions. The boxes continued moving inside. After nearly 20 minutes, the van was empty. One of the men shook Ryan's hand before climbing back into the vehicle. The others followed. Within seconds, the van disappeared down the driveway and through the front gate. Yet Ryan and Brooke did not go to bed. Instead, they remained downstairs. The lights in the study turned on. My stomach tightened. The study had once belonged to James. It was the one room in the house Brooke rarely entered. She often claimed it felt too personal, too emotional. Yet now she walked into it without hesitation. Several minutes later, Walter appeared beside the greenhouse. I nearly jumped when I saw him emerge from the shadows. He raised a hand quietly. "Easy, ma'am," he whispered. "I did not mean to scare you." I stepped closer. "Walter, what is going on?" He looked toward the house before answering. "I do not know everything, but I know enough to know you should not have left tonight." His words settled heavily in my chest. "How long have you known something was wrong?" I asked. Walter hesitated. "A few months." The answer struck me harder than I expected. A few months. That meant while I had been attending family dinners and holiday gatherings, someone else had been noticing things I had missed. Walter lowered his voice even further. "Your husband trusted me. Before he passed away, he told me something strange." I stared at him. My pulse quickened. Walter rarely mentioned James. What did he say? For a moment, he seemed uncertain. Then he sighed. He told me that if certain documents ever started moving around after his death, I should pay attention. I felt my breath catch. Documents. Not money. Not property. Documents. Suddenly, the boxes made far more sense than I wanted them to. Walter looked directly at me. "I think whatever is happening started long before tonight." I turned toward the brightly lit study window. Through the glass, I could see Ryan and Brooke sorting through papers spread across the large oak desk that had belonged to my husband for more than 30 years. Then Brooke lifted a thick folder. Even from a distance, I recognized the dark blue cover. I had seen it countless times sitting inside James's office safe. The problem was that the safe had supposedly been empty since the week after his funeral. I could not take my eyes off the blue folder. Even from the greenhouse, even through the reflection of the study window, I knew exactly what it was. James kept only a handful of documents in dark blue. Folders. He believed important papers should be easy to identify in an emergency. I remembered teasing him about it once during our marriage. He had smiled and said that when people become confused, simplicity becomes valuable. Standing in the darkness that night, I wished I had paid more attention to everything he ever told me. Brooke opened the folder and carefully removed several documents. Ryan leaned over her shoulder. Their heads moved closer together as they studied each page. Neither of them looked relaxed. Whatever they were reviewing mattered. I watched Brooke point toward a paragraph before placing another document beside it. Ryan rubbed his forehead. It was a gesture I recognized immediately. He had done that since childhood whenever he felt pressured. A strange sadness settled over me. I was not looking at strangers. I was looking at my son, the same boy who used to build blanket forts in our living room, the same boy who cried for hours when our golden retriever died. Yet tonight there was a distance between us wider than any number of miles. Walter remained silent beside me. After several minutes, he spoke softly. "There is something else you should know." I turned toward him. His expression was serious. "About 6 months ago, I saw movers here while you were visiting your sister in Arizona." I frowned. "Movers?" He nodded. "A small crew. They came through the side entrance and carried several file cabinets out of the basement." I felt a chill run through me. Ryan told me those cabinets were empty. Walter looked uncomfortable. They were not empty. I stared at the study window again. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Small details from the past year began surfacing in my memory. Conversations that had seemed harmless. Questions Brooke had asked about old accounts. Ryan insisting on helping organize paperwork. Requests for copies of documents that nobody had ever needed before. At the time, I had welcomed their interest. I thought they were helping me manage life after losing James. Now I was no longer certain. A little after midnight, the study door opened. One of the men from the van reappeared carrying a portable scanner. He placed it on the desk and began feeding documents into it one page at a time. Brooke stood beside him watching carefully. Ryan paced across the room. My heart beat faster. People do not scan hundreds of pages in the middle of the night without a reason. I found myself studying every movement, searching for answers hidden inside ordinary actions. Then something unexpected happened. Brooke reached into the blue folder and removed a sealed envelope. The sight of it struck me immediately. I knew that envelope. James had written on it personally using a black fountain pen he carried for years. The handwriting was unmistakable. Even from a distance, I recognized the strong, deliberate letters. Brooke froze for a moment after opening it. Ryan stepped closer. They read whatever was inside together. The color drained from Brooke's face. Ryan's shoulders stiffened. Neither spoke for several seconds. Walter noticed it too. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I nodded slowly. For the first time that night, they looked genuinely surprised. Not nervous. Not cautious. Surprised. Whatever was written inside that envelope was something they had not expected to find. Brooke immediately grabbed her phone and began typing a message. Ryan walked to the window and stared into the darkness outside. I instinctively stepped farther back into the shadows of the greenhouse. My pulse pounded in my ears. Something had changed. The atmosphere inside the study felt different even from 50 yards away. Then Ryan returned to the desk. He picked up the envelope and held it beneath the lamp. As he turned it, the front became visible for a brief second. 3 handwritten words appeared beneath James's signature. My eyes widened. The envelope was addressed to me. For several seconds I forgot to breathe. Addressed to me. Not to Ryan. Not to Brooke. Not to an attorney or financial advisor. To me. My husband had left behind a sealed envelope with my name on it. And somehow it had ended up in the middle of a midnight document review that I was never supposed to witness. I stared through the glass, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Brooke reached for the envelope again, but Ryan stopped her. Even from a distance I could tell they were arguing. Their movements became sharper, more tense. The confidence they had displayed earlier in the evening was gone. I thought back to the final months of James's life. At the time, everything had seemed ordinary. He spent long afternoons in his study. He met with accountants and attorneys more frequently than before. When I asked whether something was wrong, he always smiled and assured me that he was simply organizing things. A person should leave the house in order before they leave the world, he once told me. I remembered rolling my eyes at the expression. James always spoke in little sayings that sounded old-fashioned even when he was young. Yet standing there in the darkness, those words felt different, almost like a message sent forward through time. The memories continued surfacing one after another. A locked drawer he had never allowed anyone else to open. Several private phone calls that ended the moment someone entered the room. A weekend trip to Chicago that he insisted on taking alone. At the time I assumed he was protecting me from stress while dealing with business matters. Now I wondered if he had been protecting something else. Or someone else. Walter remained beside me, quiet and patient. Finally I spoke. "Did James ever say anything specific?" Walter thought for a moment. "Not specific. But about 3 months before he passed, he asked me a strange question." I turned toward him. "What question?" Walter looked down at his hands. He asked whether I believe people reveal their true character when money is involved. The answer sent a chill through me. It sounded exactly like something James would ask. He was never interested in wealth itself. What fascinated him was how people behaved around it. Over our 46 years of marriage, I had watched him quietly study people. He trusted slowly and observed carefully. Suddenly I realized something painful. Perhaps he had noticed things long before I did. Inside the study, Brooke began gathering documents into separate stacks. Ryan remained focused on the envelope. He unfolded a sheet of paper and read it again. Then again. Whatever was written there was important enough to hold his full attention. The clock in the greenhouse showed 12:43 in the morning. The property was silent except for distant crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. It felt as though the entire world had narrowed to that single room and the secrets hidden inside it. Then Brooke did something unexpected. She walked directly to the old wall safe built behind a framed painting. My heart nearly stopped. I knew that safe. I had believed it was empty for nearly 2 years. Ryan entered a code. The door opened. Brooke reached inside and removed a small metal box. I stared in disbelief. After the funeral, Ryan had personally assured me that every item from the safe had been inventoried and transferred. Yet there it was, a box I had never seen before. Brooke placed it on the desk. Ryan opened it slowly. The moment the lid lifted, both of them froze. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the shock on their faces. Then Ryan carefully reached into the box and pulled out a second sealed envelope. This one carried a short handwritten instruction across the front. In unmistakable black ink, James had written 5 words that made my pulse race. Open only if Evelyn knows. The words on the envelope echoed in my mind. Open only if Evelyn knows. James had written them in his unmistakable handwriting. Not only had he anticipated that secrets might surface after his death, but he had apparently prepared for the possibility that I would eventually discover them. The realization left me standing motionless in the darkness. Inside the study, Ryan slowly placed the envelope back into the metal box. Brooke immediately began speaking. Even though I could not hear her words, her expression revealed urgency. She pointed toward the first envelope, then toward several documents spread across the desk. Ryan shook his head. The disagreement between them was becoming more obvious with every passing minute. For years I had assumed Brooke was the more confident one in the marriage. She made decisions quickly. She organized family gatherings. She handled details. Ryan often deferred to her judgment. Yet tonight something felt different. Brooke appeared determined. Ryan appeared conflicted. I watched him stare repeatedly at the envelope addressed to me. Whatever was written inside the letter he had already read seemed to be weighing heavily on him. Walter quietly guided me farther back into the greenhouse. You should not stay out here all night, he said softly. The temperature is dropping. He was right. The air had become noticeably colder. A thin layer of dew was beginning to form on the greenhouse windows. Still, I could not leave. Not now. Not after everything I had seen. I looked toward Walter. Did James ever ask you to do anything specific? For the first time that evening, Walter hesitated for a long moment before answering. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his work jacket. My pulse quickened. He carefully removed a small folded piece of paper that appeared worn from age. He told me to keep this safe, Walter said. Only if something unusual happened. My hands trembled slightly as he handed it to me. The paper was yellowed at the edges. I unfolded it carefully. There were only 2 sentences written on it. The handwriting belonged to James. I recognized it instantly. Evelyn, if you are reading this, trust what you see, not what people tell you. The truth is already in the house. I read the words twice. Then a third time. My chest tightened. The truth is already in the house. Not hidden in a bank. Not locked in a law office. Not buried somewhere in the past. Inside the house. The same house where Ryan and Brooke were sitting at that very moment. Suddenly, several memories resurfaced with startling clarity. 6 months earlier, Brooke had insisted on renovating the basement storage room. 3 months after that, Ryan had suggested replacing several locks throughout the property. Then there had been the repeated conversations about transferring documents into digital storage. At the time, each decision sounded practical, reasonable, responsible. Now every memory carried a different weight. Walter watched my expression carefully. I thought you should have that. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. Before I could respond, movement inside the study caught my attention. Brooke was gathering papers again. Ryan stood and walked toward the wall safe. He reached inside one final time and removed something small. It looked like a key, not a modern key card or electronic device. An actual brass key, the kind that belonged to an older lock. Brooke's eyes widened the moment she saw it. She immediately stepped closer. Ryan stared at the key for several seconds. Then he looked toward the bookshelf lining the far wall of the study. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that bookshelf. James had built it himself nearly 20 years ago. Every shelf, every panel, every detail. And suddenly, I remembered something I had not thought about in decades. During the renovation, James once joked that every good library should contain at least one secret. At the time, I assumed he was teasing me. But as Ryan approached the bookshelf holding the brass key, I began to wonder whether it had never been a joke at all. Ryan stopped in front of the bookshelf and stood completely still. The brass key remained in his hand, while Brooke waited impatiently beside him. I could see her speaking, urging him to do something, but Ryan did not move immediately. Instead, he stared at the shelves as though he was searching for a detail he had overlooked. My mind drifted back more than 20 years to the summer James built that wall. He had spent nearly 3 months working on it during weekends. Every board was measured twice. Every corner was sanded by hand. At the time, I thought it was simply another one of his projects. James loved building things. He always said a person understood a house better after leaving fingerprints on its walls. Now, watching my son stand before that bookshelf in the middle of the night, I wondered how much of that project had remained hidden from me. Ryan reached toward a section near the center shelf. He removed 3 books and set them aside. Then he inserted the brass key into something concealed behind the row of hardcovers. Brooke immediately leaned forward. A second later, part of the bookshelf shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal a narrow compartment hidden within the wall. Even from the greenhouse, I felt my pulse quicken. Walter quietly inhaled beside me. Apparently, he had not known about it either. Ryan carefully reached inside the compartment and removed a thick leather portfolio. Dust covered the surface. Whatever had been hidden there had not been touched in a very long time. Brooke's face brightened with relief. It was the first genuine smile I had seen from her all evening. That reaction told me more than words ever could. She had expected to find something valuable. Ryan carried the portfolio back to the desk and opened it. Papers filled the inside. Dozens of them. Some appeared to be legal documents. Others looked handwritten. Brooke immediately began sorting through the contents. Ryan remained focused on a single page near the bottom. He read it slowly. Then he sat down. The look on his face was impossible to ignore. Confusion, regret, shock. Emotions passed across his expression one after another. Meanwhile, Brooke grew increasingly agitated. She flipped through pages faster and faster. Several times, she shook her head in frustration. It became obvious that whatever she hoped to find was not there. Minutes passed. Then Ryan suddenly pushed one document across the desk toward her. Brooke read it. The color drained from her face almost instantly. She grabbed the page and read it again. My stomach tightened. Something inside that portfolio had changed everything. Walter turned toward me. "Ma'am, I think your husband knew exactly what he was doing." I did not answer immediately. My eyes remained fixed on the study window. For years after James passed away, I had struggled with one question. Had he known his time was limited? He never spoke about fear, never complained, never allowed self-pity into our home. Yet the deeper this night unfolded, the more convinced I became that he had prepared for possibilities far beyond his own death. Suddenly Brooke stood and began pacing the room. Ryan remained seated. He no longer looked like a man protecting a secret. He looked like a man discovering one. The difference was important. Then something happened that neither Walter nor I expected. Ryan reached for the envelope addressed to me. Without hesitation, he placed it inside his jacket pocket. Brooke immediately objected. Even from a distance, her reaction was obvious. Ryan responded firmly. For the first time all night, he appeared certain about something. Brooke folded her arms and looked away. The argument ended there. A few minutes later, they began packing documents back into boxes. Not all of them, only selected files. The leather portfolio remained on the desk. The envelope addressed to me remained inside Ryan's jacket. As they worked, a realization slowly settled over me. Until tonight, I had believed I was observing a conspiracy unfolding. Now I was no longer sure, because the expression on my son's face suggested something entirely different. It suggested that he had just learned the truth at exactly the same moment I had. The realization stayed with me as the night moved quietly toward morning. Ryan might have been involved in decisions I did not understand, but the expression I had just witnessed was not the expression of someone executing a plan. It was the expression of someone discovering that the plan had never belonged to him in the first place. Inside the study, the activity gradually slowed. The stacks of documents became smaller. Several boxes were sealed and pushed against the wall. Brooke remained focused on the paperwork, but her confidence had vanished. She checked pages repeatedly, sometimes returning to documents she had already reviewed. Each time she did, her frustration became more visible. Ryan, meanwhile, spent long stretches staring at the leather portfolio. He occasionally reread certain pages before placing them back inside. Whatever James had hidden there was affecting him deeply. Around 1:30 in the morning, Brooke finally left the room. I watched her disappear down the hallway. Ryan remained alone. For the first time that evening, he looked exactly like the little boy I remembered. Tired, overwhelmed, lost. He sat at the desk where his father had spent thousands of hours over the years and rested his hands against his face. I found myself unexpectedly emotional. For nearly 2 years, I had blamed Ryan for growing distant after James died. I assumed he had chosen convenience over family. I assumed Brooke had simply become his priority. Yet now I wondered how much pressure he had been carrying without ever speaking about it. Walter stood quietly beside me. Neither of us said anything for several minutes. Sometimes silence reveals more than conversation. Then Ryan did something neither of us expected. He opened the envelope addressed to me. My breath caught. Carefully, almost reluctantly, he unfolded the letter and began reading. His eyes moved slowly across the page. Halfway through, he stopped. He read a section again. Then he continued. By the time he reached the end, tears filled his eyes. Ryan quickly wiped them away, but not before I saw them. My son rarely cried. James used to joke that Ryan inherited every emotion except tears. Yet whatever his father had written had broken through years of restraint in a matter of moments. Ryan folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. Then he reached for his phone. He stared at the screen for a long time without typing anything. Eventually, he set it down again. A decision seemed to be forming inside him. Shortly before 2 o'clock, the study lights went dark. Ryan left carrying the envelope and the leather portfolio. Brooke emerged from upstairs moments later. They exchanged a brief conversation in the hallway before disappearing toward their bedroom. The house finally became still. I remained in the greenhouse a little longer, watching the dark windows. My legs ached. My shoulders felt stiff from the cold. Yet I was more awake than I had been in months. The night had raised far more questions than it answered. Walter eventually touched my arm gently. "You should get some rest, ma'am." I nodded. He was right. There was nothing more to learn until morning. We quietly crossed the property toward the small guest cottage near the gardens. James had originally built it as a retreat for visiting friends. Few people used it anymore. Walter unlocked the door and switched on a lamp. The familiar scent of cedarwood greeted me. As I sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion finally began settling in. But sleep did not come easily. My thoughts kept returning to the same question. What had James written in that letter? Not because I was curious about money or property. Those things suddenly felt secondary. What mattered was understanding why my husband had spent years preparing for a future conversation he knew he would never personally have. Just before dawn, as pale sunlight began appearing beyond the trees, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. The screen illuminated the dark room. A single new message had arrived. The sender was Ryan. My hands trembled as I opened it. There were only 7 words written on the screen. "Mom, we need to talk. Alone." The message remained on my screen long after the sunrise filled the cottage windows with pale gold light. "Mom, we need to talk. Alone." I read the words several times. Not because they were difficult to understand, but because of how unusual they felt. For nearly 2 years, every meaningful conversation with Ryan had happened in Brooke's presence. Decisions were discussed together. Plans were presented together. Even simple family matters seemed to pass through an invisible filter before reaching me. Yet now he was asking to meet alone. That single word carried more weight than the rest of the sentence. I replied with a short message and agreed to meet him at the lake pavilion behind the property. It was a quiet place James loved. By 8 o'clock that morning, I was sitting on a wooden bench overlooking the water. The surface of the lake was perfectly still. A pair of ducks drifted slowly across the reflection of the trees. Everything appeared peaceful. Yet inside me, questions continued multiplying. 20 minutes later, Ryan arrived. He looked exhausted. His shirt was wrinkled. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sat beside me and carefully placed 2 items on the bench between us. The first was the envelope addressed to me. The second was the leather portfolio from the hidden compartment. My heart immediately began beating faster. Ryan stared out across the water. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think Dad knew this day would come." I waited. Ryan took a deep breath before continuing. For the last year, Brooke convinced me that Dad had left behind incomplete records. She said there were missing documents, missing accounts, missing instructions. She believed there was another version of his estate plan hidden somewhere. He paused. At first I thought she was being thorough. Then I started believing her. His voice carried genuine regret. Not defensiveness. Not excuses. Regret. Last night was supposed to be the end of the search, he admitted. She hired researchers, investigators, financial consultants. Every time they found another clue, she became more convinced there was something larger hidden away. I looked down at the envelope and was there. Ryan gave a small, humorless laugh. Yes, but not what she expected. Slowly, he handed me the letter. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. The paper inside was several pages long. James's handwriting filled every line. Dear Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means certain people spent more time searching for hidden assets than preserving family trust. I felt my throat tighten immediately. Ryan remained silent while I continued reading. The letter was not about money, not about secret accounts, not about property. It was about character. Page after page contained observations James had recorded over several years. Conversations, decisions, patterns he had quietly noticed. He explained how easy it was for families to become distracted by what they might inherit rather than what they already possessed. Then I reached the final page. There, beneath his signature, James revealed the true purpose of everything. The hidden compartment, the sealed envelopes, the missing documents. They were never meant to protect wealth. They were designed to reveal who could be trusted when wealth appeared to be at stake. I lowered the letter slowly. Ryan was staring at the water. There is more, he said quietly. He opened the leather portfolio and removed a single document. Mom, Dad left one final instruction. As he handed me the page, I noticed the date written at the top. It had been signed only 3 weeks before his death. My eyes remained fixed on the date at the top of the document. 3 weeks before James passed away. 3 weeks before the hospital room. 3 weeks before. The final goodbye I still replayed in my mind on quiet evenings. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I carefully began reading. The document was simple. There was no complicated legal language. No references to trusts, accounts, or hidden assets. Instead, it contained a personal directive written in James's own words. If this document is being read, then the test is complete. The sentence stopped me cold. A test. Ryan looked down as I continued. James explained that over the years he had built multiple layers of records, files, and false trails. Not to deceive his family, but to reveal priorities. He wanted to know who would focus on preserving relationships and who would become consumed by the possibility of finding something more. Every hidden compartment, every sealed envelope, every missing file had been part of a carefully designed system. Then I reached the section that mattered most. The true inheritance has already been distributed. Nothing remains hidden. Anyone still searching is no longer looking for security. They are looking for control. I slowly lowered the page. The lake remained calm before us. The morning sunlight danced across the water. Yet inside me, years of confusion were finally beginning to settle into clarity. Ryan broke the silence first. The consultants found that out last night. I turned toward him. He nodded. There were never any secret accounts. No hidden fortune. No undisclosed properties. Dad completed everything years ago. His voice carried equal parts relief and disappointment. Not disappointment about money. Disappointment about everything the search had revealed. I thought about Brooke. About the endless investigations. The late-night meetings. The missing documents. The growing obsession with finding something that never existed. For the first time, I felt neither anger nor bitterness. Only sadness. James had not created a trap. He had created a mirror. And eventually everyone had revealed themselves within it. Ryan handed me one final page from the portfolio. This one contained a list. At the top was my name. Beneath it were the names of several charitable organizations James had quietly supported throughout his life. Scholarship funds, veterans programs, community projects. At the bottom appeared one final instruction. Evelyn decides what comes next. I smiled despite the tears forming in my eyes. That sounded exactly like James. Even after all his planning, he still left the final decision to me. Several days later, the boxes were gone. The study was quiet again. The hidden compartment had been emptied and documented. The consultants had finished their work. Ryan spent more time at my house than he had in years. We talked honestly for the first time since his father died. Not about money, about grief, about mistakes, about the ways people drift apart when they stop asking difficult questions. Brooke eventually apologized. It was not dramatic. It was not perfect, but it was sincere. I accepted it because carrying resentment felt heavier than setting it down. Some relationships healed quickly. Others needed time. That was all right. Healing rarely follows a schedule. One afternoon, several weeks later, I found myself standing in the garden beside Walter. He was trimming roses while sunlight filtered through the branches above us. "You were right," I told him. He smiled. "About what?" I looked toward the house, toward the windows of the study where so many secrets had finally come into the light. Something important did happen that night. Walter chuckled softly and returned to his work. As I stood there, I thought about how close I had come to driving away. If I had left when everyone expected me to leave, I might never have understood what James was truly trying to protect. It was never wealth, never property, never documents. It was trust. The night I stayed behind, I thought I was uncovering a hidden fortune. Instead, I uncovered something far more valuable: the truth. And once the truth arrived, everything else finally found its proper place.